Hi everyone, how are you? Today we are going to continue activity 4 from stimulus to response, pathways and nervous center. Before continuing this activity, let's make a quick revision about Magendie experiment. If you remember, the aim of Magendie's experiment was to know or to conclude the role or the importance of the dorsal root, the role or the importance of the ventral root, as well as the spinal nerve and the spinal cord. And what we were able to pick out or to conclude from such experiment was that the dorsal root is sensory. It is responsible for transmitting the sensory information that is received by the receptors of the sensory organs to take it toward the central nervous system, which is the spinal cord and the brain, in order to be analyzed. Then, with respect to the ventral root, we concluded that it is motor, where it is responsible for transmitting the motor information, which is secreted by the brain or the spinal cord and taken by the ventral root toward the effector organs or motor organs in order to achieve a movement or a reaction. So the dorsal root is sensory, the ventral root is motor, and with respect to the spinal nerve, it is responsible for transmitting both sensory information as well as motor information, and for that reason we give it a second name called mixed nerve. And if the spinal cord was destroyed inside our body, no reaction will take place because it is the site of connection. It is the one that connects the sensory information with the motor information, and it is the one that allows us to react for every action we are subjected to. What we are going to study today. Today, first of all, we are going to start with document C. What is the aim of document C? If you remember, we've studied together the structure of the neuron, and we said that the neuron or the nerve cell consists of two parts, a cell body and axon. And if I asked you which part of the neuron contains the nucleus, you can tell me the cell body of the neuron contains the nucleus. In this experiment, it is showing you the importance of the nucleus, why it is important. Let's have a look and see what happens. They got an amoeba, it's a unicellular organism, and it is cut in two parts. They are applying an experiment on it. This cell was cut into two parts, part A and part B. And if you look, part A, it contains the nucleus, and part B, it is unnucleated, it doesn't have the nucleus. If you notice that part B, the part B from the cell, was degenerated. What do you mean degenerated? Died. It doesn't undergo renewal. It was not able to renew itself, while the part of the cell A, which contains the nucleus, it renews itself and it becomes a new cell. If we have to conclude from such document, we can say that the nucleus is very important for the renewal of cells. So inside our body cells, the nucleus plays an important role because it is the one that is responsible for renewing our cells as well as for many other functions. So without the nucleus, the cell gonna die, because the nucleus, it is the main part responsible for regenerating the cells and allowing them to continue their activity. So if I ask you to interpret document C, you can tell me, in the presence of a nucleus in part A, this is the variable presence and absence of nucleus, the cell continues on living, whereas in the absence of a nucleus in part B, the cell degenerates, it dies. So the nucleus is the vital center of the cell. It is the important part of the cell. Now, you are going to ask me a question. Why we are studying the importance of the nucleus? This experiment, yes, this document C, is very important because it will help you to understand the next experiment, which is document D. So from here, I just want you to conclude one idea through which you are going to use it for the next document. And such idea is that the nucleus is very important for regeneration. What do you mean by regeneration? For renewing, for undergoing the cell to renew itself. Without the nucleus, if there is a part without a nucleus, it is going to die. It will degenerate because it will not be able to undergo renewal. Now we use document C, the conclusion of document C for document D. Okay, what does it include? Document D, it is showing you the location of the cell bodies of nerve fibers of a spinal nerve. We are studying the importance of the cell body, the location of the cell body along the nerves of the nerve fibers, the nerves of the spinal cord. Why do we want to check the location of the cell body? If you remember, during a reflex action, we've studied that the sensory information passes from the receptors of the sensory organ, and then it enters through the dorsal root, then to the spinal cord to be analyzed, and then it is going to move through the ventral root to reach the motor organ, which is the muscle. Okay. Today we are going to take in details the neurons, where are they found in such figure. So in such figure, what we are going to check for, okay, is the location of the cell body. How we are going to find the location of the cell body? You have to use the previous information that we concluded in document C, which is, look, we have parts colored in gray. These parts, they are the parts that are degenerated. What do you mean by degenerated? The parts that are dead. In other words, they are the parts where they don't contain a cell body. Okay? So, in such parts, look here, there is a gray part, here is a gray part, here is a gray part, as well as here. So the part that is colored gray, it is the degenerated part. In other words, it doesn't contain a cell body. Okay, so by this we will be able to know the location of the cell body. Four experiments were applied. The first one is, okay, places of sections. It is showing you the place where they sectioned, where they cut, okay, in order to check for the location of the cell body. They cut here at the end of the ventral root, okay, at the end of the ventral side. We noticed that what was degenerated is to the left of the degeneration, to the right of the degeneration. All the fibers on the right of sectioning were degenerated. This means that there is no cell body, okay, along the spinal nerve or to the right side of the ventral root. Okay, so here in this part, no cell body. Then in experiment B, the sectioning was at the beginning of the ventral root. Okay, here is the sectioning at the beginning of the ventral root. When they sectioned, they noticed that all the ventral fibers of the ventral root as well as of the spinal nerve were degenerated. This confirms that in the ventral root as well as in the spinal nerve there is no cell body because they are degenerated. So we can conclude from A and B that the cell body is located to the left of sectioning, which means inside the spinal cord. And from activity 3, we've studied together that the white matter of the spinal cord contains nerve fibers, you remember, and the cell body is found in the gray matter. So the location of the first cell body is found in the gray matter of the spinal cord toward the ventral side. So if you have to conclude from here that the neuron, the first neuron that we found its cell body is toward the ventral side. It means below. Yes, in the gray matter of the spinal cord, here is the cell body, and its nerve fiber, its axon, is extended all along the ventral root and the spinal nerve. This is for the first conclusion from the first two experiments A and B. And with respect to experiment C, sectioning was taking place before the spinal ganglion. Before the spinal ganglion they sectioned. We noticed that the degeneration took place to the left of sectioning. This means that to the left of sectioning there is no cell body. So the cell body might be in the spinal ganglion or along the dorsal root or the spinal nerve. What confirms or what allows us to find the location of the cell body is when they applied experiment D and sectioning took place after the spinal ganglion. We noticed that all the dorsal root as well as the spinal nerve, they degenerated. This means that the cell body, if the cell body doesn't exist before the spinal ganglion and after the spinal ganglion, so the cell body is found in the spinal ganglion. So from experiments C and D, we were able to find out the location of the second neuron, which is in the spinal ganglion. Its cell body is found in the spinal ganglion of the dorsal root. And by this we were able to know the pathway of the nervous message during the reflex action along the neurons that are found in the roots of the spinal cord as well as in the spinal cord. So based on sectioning A and B, okay, here we can say A instead of A and B, we can say experiment 3. The cell body of the motor neuron is found in the ventral root or motor root or anterior root of the gray matter of the spinal cord. And based on sectioning C and D, as if you are saying here experiment 2, the cell body of the sensory neuron is in the spinal ganglion of the dorsal root. And this what you have taken before. Now it will be more detailed and more clear. I'm gonna remind you with a reflex action. A reflex action, it is an involuntary automatic action controlled by the spinal cord. And the pathway of the nervous message that takes place during a reflex action, we call it a reflex arc, and it corresponds to the pathway of the sensory message that takes place along the sensory neuron. And today we found out its location. We've said that the sensory neuron, its cell body is found in the spinal ganglion of the dorsal root, and then it moves toward the interneuron that is found inside the gray matter of the spinal cord, and the interneuron gonna transmit another message to the motor neuron where its cell body is found in the gray matter of the spinal cord toward the ventral side, and the message gonna move along the ventral root toward the muscle in order to achieve a reflex action. This is all for the pathway of the reflex action. So the experiments that we have done, that we have explained today, will allow you to understand the reflex arc very well and the neurons that are found. Look, this diagram is very important because I have drawn the neurons that are found inside the roots, okay, as well as the spinal cord and the pathway of the nervous message. So the first cell body, okay, from experiment C and D, we notice that it's found in the spinal ganglion, and these are the dendrites. The dendrites, they are connected to the receptors, so the message gonna move from the receptors of the sensory organs to the dendrites, then to the cell body, then to the axon, then to the interneuron. The interneuron gonna transmit it to the cell body of the motor neuron that is found in the gray matter of the spinal cord toward the ventral side, and then gonna take it to the axon of the multipolar neuron to reach the muscles in order to achieve a reaction. And here is all the information needed to understand it. If I ask you to name the neurons that exist in a reflex action, you have to tell me its nature as well as its structure. You have to put a complete name. We say that we have a unipolar sensory neuron in the spinal ganglion of the dorsal root, an interneuron in the gray matter of the spinal cord, a multipolar motor neuron in the gray matter of the spinal cord. So we have three neurons. We've discussed their structure as well as their function, and we've studied the pathway of the reflex action, which is called reflex arc. So as a conclusion, the role or the importance of the functional neurons: the sensory neuron, it carries nerve impulses from the receptors to the central nervous system. They are also called afferent neurons. The cell body of the sensory neuron is outside the central nervous system. It means not in the spinal cord. It is in the spinal ganglion of the dorsal root. And with respect to the motor neuron, it carries nerve impulses from the CNS, central nervous system, which might be the brain or the spinal cord, to the effector or motor organs. They are also called efferent neurons, and the cell bodies of the motor neurons are inside the central nervous system, where we find them in the gray matter. And with respect to the interneuron or intermediate or relay or associative neuron, it carries information between sensory and motor neurons, and they are found in the central nervous system. They play an intermediate role between the sensory and the motor neuron. This is all for activity 4. Any question, please ask me. Thank you.